Thousand Splendid Suns. Part 1 Chapter 11. Mariam had never before worn a burqa. Rashid had to help her put it on. The padded headpiece felt tight and heavy on her skull, and it was strange seeing the world through a mesh screen. She practiced walking around her room in it and kept stepping on the hem and stumbling. The loss of peripheral vision was unnerving, and she did not like the suffocating way the pleated cloth kept pressing against her mouth. "You'll get used to it," Rashid said. "With time I bet you'll even like it." They took a bus to a place Rashid called the Sharinau Park, where children pushed each other on swings and slapped volleyballs over ragged nets tied to tree trunks. They strolled together and watched boys fly kites, Mariam walking beside Rashid, tripping now and then on the burqa's hem. For lunch, Rashid took her to eat in a small kebab house near a mosque he called the Haji Yaghub. The floor was sticky and the air smoky. The walls smelled faintly of raw meat, and the music, which Rashid described to her as loggery, was loud. The cooks were thin boys who fanned skewers with one hand and swatted gnats with the other. Mariam, who had never been inside a restaurant, found it odd at first to sit in a crowded room with so many strangers, to lift her burqa to put morsels of food into her mouth. A hint of the same anxiety as the day at the tandoor stirred in her stomach, but Rashid's presence was of some comfort, and after a while she did not mind so much the music, the smoke, even the people. And the burqa, she learned to her surprise, was also comforting. It was like a one-way window. Inside it she was an observer, buffered from the scrutinizing eyes of strangers. She no longer worried that people knew with a single glance all the shameful secrets of her past. On the streets, Rashid named various buildings with authority. "This is the American Embassy," he said. "That the Foreign Ministry." He pointed to cars, said their names and where they were made. "Soviet Volgas, American Chevrolets, German Opels." "Which is your favorite?" he asked. Mariam hesitated, pointed to a Volga, and Rashid laughed. Kabul was far more crowded than the little that Mariam had seen of Herat. There were fewer trees and fewer garris pulled by horses, but more cars, taller buildings, more traffic lights and more paved roads. And everywhere Mariam heard the city's peculiar dialect. Dear was John instead of Joe, sister became Hamshira instead of Hampshire, and so on. From a street vendor, Rashid bought her ice cream. It was the first time she'd eaten ice cream, and Mariam had never imagined that such tricks could be played on a palate. She devoured the entire bowl, the crushed pistachio topping, the tiny rice noodles at the bottom. She marveled at the bewitching texture, the lapping sweetness of it. They walked on to a place called Kochimorga, Chicken Street. It was a narrow, crowded bazaar in a neighborhood that Rashid said was one of Kabul's wealthier ones. "Around here is where foreign diplomats live, rich businessmen, members of the royal family, that sort of people. Not like you and me." "I don't see any chickens," Mariam said. "That's the one thing you can't find on Chicken Street." Rashid laughed. The street was lined with shops and little stalls that sold lambskin hats and rainbow-colored chophands. Rashid stopped to look at an engraved silver dagger in one shop, and in another at an old rifle that the shopkeeper assured Rashid was a relic from the First War against the British. "And I'm Moshe Dayan," Rashid muttered. He half smiled, and it seemed to Mariam that this was a smile meant only for her. A private married smile. They strolled past carpet shops, handicraft shops, pastry shops, flower shops, and shops that sold suits for men and dresses for women, and in them, behind lace curtains, Mariam saw young girls sewing buttons and ironing collars. From time to time, Rashid greeted a shopkeeper he knew, sometimes in Farsi, other times in Pashto. As they shook hands and kissed on the cheek, Mariam stood a few feet away. Rashid did not wave her over, did not introduce her. He asked her to wait outside an embroidery shop. "I know the owner," he said. "I'll just go in for a minute, say my salam." Mariam waited outside on the crowded sidewalk. She watched the cars crawling up Chicken Street, threading through the horde of hawkers and pedestrians, honking at children and donkeys who wouldn't move. She watched the bored-looking merchants inside their tiny stalls, smoking, or spitting into brass spittoons, their faces emerging from the shadows now and then to peddle textiles and fur-collared Persian coats to passers-by. But it was the women who drew Mariam's eyes the most. The women in this part of Kabul were a different breed from the women in the poorer neighborhoods like the one where she and Rashid lived, where so many of the women covered fully. These women were what was the word Rashid had used? Modern. Yes, modern Afghan women married to modern Afghan men who did not mind that their wives walked among strangers with makeup on their faces and nothing on their heads. Mariam watched them cantering uninhibited down the street, sometimes with a man, sometimes alone, sometimes with rosy-cheeked children who wore shiny shoes and watches with leather bands, who walked bicycles with high-rise handlebars and gold-colored spokes unlike the children in Demazong, who bore sandfly scars on their cheeks and rolled old bicycle tires with sticks. These women were all swinging handbags and rustling skirts. Mariam even spotted one smoking behind the wheel of a car. Their nails were long, polished pink or orange, their lips red as tulips. They walked in high heels and quickly as if on perpetually urgent business. They wore dark sunglasses, and when they breezed by, Mariam caught a whiff of their perfume. She imagined that they all had university degrees, that they worked in office buildings behind desks of their own, where they typed and smoked and made important telephone calls to important people. These women mystified Mariam. They made her aware of her own lowliness, her plain looks, her lack of aspirations, her ignorance of so many things. Then Rashid was tapping her on the shoulder and handing her something here. It was a dark maroon silk shawl with beaded fringes and edges embroidered with gold thread. Do you like it? Mariam looked up. Rashid did a touching thing then. He blinked and averted her gaze. Mariam thought of Jalil, of the emphatic jovial way in which he'd pushed his jewelry at her, the overpowering cheerfulness that left room for no response but meek gratitude. Nana had been right about Mill's gifts. They had been half-hearted tokens of penance, insincere, corrupt gestures meant more for his own appeasement than hers. The shawl Mariam saw was a true gift. It's beautiful, she said. That night Rashid visited her room again. But instead of smoking in the doorway, he crossed the room and sat beside her where she lay on the bed. The springs creaked as the bed tilted to his side. There was a moment of hesitation, and then his hand was on her neck, his thick fingers slowly pressing the knobs in the back of it. His thumb slid down, and now it was stroking the hollow above her collarbone, then the flesh beneath it. Mariam began shivering. His hand crept lower, still lower, his fingernails catching in the cotton of her blouse. I can't, she croaked, looking at his moonlit profile, his thick shoulders and broad chest, the tufts of gray hair protruding from his open collar. His hand was on her right breast now, squeezing it hard through the blouse, and she could hear him breathing deeply through the nose. He slid under the blanket beside her. She could feel his hand working at his belt, at the drawstring of her trousers. Her own hands clenched the sheets in fistfuls. He rolled on top of her, wriggled and shifted, and she let out a whimper. Mariam closed her eyes, gritted her teeth. The pain was sudden and astonishing. Her eyes sprang open. She sucked air through her teeth and bit on the knuckle of her thumb. She slung her free arm over Rashid's back and her fingers dug at his shirt. Rashid buried his face into her pillow, and Mariam stared wide-eyed at the ceiling above his shoulder, shivering, lips pursed, feeling the heat of his quick breaths on her shoulder. The air between them smelled of tobacco, of the onions and grilled lamb they had eaten earlier. Now and then his ear rubbed against her cheek, and she knew from the scratchy feel that he had shaved it. When it was done, he rolled off her, panting. He dropped his forearm over his brow. In the dark she could see the blue hands of his watch. They lay that way for a while on their backs, not looking at each other. There is no shame in this, Mariam, he said, slurring a little. It's what married people do. It's what the Prophet himself and his wives did. There is no shame. A few moments later he pushed back the blanket and left the room, leaving her with the impression of his head on her pillow, leaving her to wait out the pain down below, to look at the frozen stars in the sky and a cloud that draped the face of the moon like a wedding veil.